Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Strategic Planning, Tuesday, the 15th of August. The usual housekeeping rules, please. Under the Openness of Local Government Bodies Regulation 2014, members of the public or those party to the meeting are permitted to film, broadcast or report on the meeting subject to the efficient running of the meeting not being affected. Only those people who have registered in line with the committee's speaking procedure can address the committee. Members of the public are requested not to call out during the committee's discussions on any item. All speakers will have 5 minutes in which to make their statement. Participants addressing the planning committee will advise when they have 60 seconds of the allotted time remaining and will be expected to cease talking immediately on being advised that their time is up. Speakers may be asked to remain seated after they address the committee to answer questions from the planning committee members. There are no planned fire drills, so if the alarm does sound, evacuation instructions will be given by the democratic officers and the assembly point is at the bottom of the steps on the mount. Could electronic devices please be switched off or to silent mode? For those members using laptops, could I please ask they press F1 on their machines and a blue light will come on indicating the sound is muted. This meeting will be webcast on the Council's corporate YouTube channel. Therefore, when speaking, please use your microphones. Thank you. Right, moving on to the agenda now. Have we got any apologies for absence and appointment of substitute members, please?
Apologies from Councillor Clubley, Councillor James, Councillor Russell, Councillor Gonzalez de Savage and Councillor Purser, and Councillor Clark is subbing for Councillor Gonzalez de Savage.
Thank you. Members, any declarations of interest? Take that as a no. Minutes held on the 18th of July. Is it members wish to sign those minutes? Yes, agreed. Thank you. There's no chair's announcements, so we'll now move straight to the planning application, which is WNS/2202/2402/EIA. So I'll hand that over to the officer, Chris Burton, please.
Good afternoon, councillors. Just to cover off the committee updates which were shared yesterday, there was a small addition to the planning policy section, just to confirm discussion with the Northamptonshire Waste and Minerals team in regards to it not being a county-wide matter but a district application. Paragraph 2.4, the proposed tonnage should have read 92,000 tonnes, not 98,000. And at paragraph 7.39, my apologies, the sentence did not complete. So, no, sorry, not 7.39, at 7.54, I include the last bit of the sentence. I've also included a correction to paragraph 7.39 regarding the comments from Quinton Parish Council and the proposed condition to go with it. We have had another update for you. We've had further discussion and with regards to a further condition we're proposing to add, which we've had consent from the applicant for, regarding a remediation strategy for 30 years. So the life of the AD plant is 30 years time, and they will accept a remediation strategy, which will be to restore the land after 30 years, or they'll be welcome to submit a new application, which will then be determined again by the, well, depending on the scheme of delegation, the strategic committee. So the application in front of you would import and treat in the region of 92,000 tonnes of feedstock per annum from the land holding in which the site is located and from local farms. This would undergo a process of controlled decomposition, which is anaerobic digestion, within the anaerobic digestion facility. This anaerobic digestion generates biogas, which is upgraded on site into biomethane before being removed by tanker to a central facility for injection into the national grid. The AD facility would have the capacity to produce approximately 19,735,000 meters cube of biogas per annum. The feedstock would typically comprise the following, which is silage, so that's rye, maize and grass, straw, dairy slurry, farm yard manures and poultry litter. In addition to the biogas, the AD process also produces a nutrient-rich solid fertilizer and soil conditioner and a liquid fertilizer, which is digestate. This would be used on local farms in place of raw manures and artificial fertilizers. The AD process would also result in the production of carbon dioxide as a natural byproduct. This byproduct is usually vented by AD plant operators, for whom the main goal is the production of biomethane. However, at this site, it is proposed that CO2 will be maintained on site and then sold to the industrial sites in Northampton. The site has capacity for 2 days of CO2 storage. The AD facility would produce approximately 10,000 tonnes of CO2 a year. The proposed AD facility would produce biomethane, which could be used directly to heat homes and fuel vehicles. The proposed development could provide enough green gas to meet the heating demand of 7,650 UK households. The biomethane produced by the AD facility would also have an equivalent saving of 31,230 tonnes of CO2 each year, which is equivalent of taking 20,750 cars off the road. The site is located at East Lodge Farm, south of Northampton and Courtine Hall, and is west of the M1 and east of the A508 on Northampton Road and Road. It covers 2 fields north and south of access track, which runs past East Lodge, which also forms part of the Midshire Way, a regional route. The total site area is approximately 6.3 hectares and is grade 3 agricultural land, which is considered good to moderate quality arable land, and it is in flood zone 1, which is the lowest risk. These site pictures were taken in March when I conducted my first site visit. And this is taken with my back towards the M1. You can see the sloping of the field away from me, and that goes towards Courtine Hall. The tallest part of the site is proposed to be, as you follow the dip down, I have another photo which I think shows the pronounced site topography in better detail. The proposed site here would be to the left of the picture, and to the right, you have the recently approved chicken sheds. I don't think the photo does justice, and the members on site will probably attest to this. They are large chicken sheds. And then further to the right of the photo would sit the M1. This looks across the current public footpath, and to the right is where the majority of the built form would be. And then to the left of the hedge is where the covered lagoon would sit. This sits at the far end of the last photo you saw. And again, you can see the topography dipping away from you, which is where the main height of the built form is proposed. You'll notice to the far sort of back of the site, you have the farm building. Within there, they're agricultural tide dwellings. That's not to say that one would expect there to be any additional impact to them, but there is, of course, a consideration that agricultural tide dwellings will be around agricultural production. The site, the majority of the site here sits behind you. To the left of the site would be the M1, and this is the wind turbines that sit alongside the M1. Excuse me. And here we have the site layout. So the first photo that you were shown sits in this location. And then we move down the slope here. And here we have the main tanks with the height, Courtine Hall Farms up here, and the chicken sheds you saw in the photos along here. Here we have the site sections. So the top one, that looks at the site. I'll go back to the site location. from this part of the site, you can see the use of topography moving down. So the highest element is almost to the bottom of the site. And obviously the drainage pond is at the bottom of the site, just with natural gravity being the requirement. And then you have, which would be sort of across from the top of the site, another site section. So you can see the general plant facilities and again, the tanks behind. This slide shows the approved and extant consents around the development. So we have the chicken sedge, of which you saw the photos. And then in this location and with these ponds, we have a hydroponic agricultural, excuse me, not greenhouses, the polythene greenhouses. So that's an extant consent. I don't believe it's been implemented, well, it hasn't been implemented yet, but yeah, it was approved in 2022. In this location, we have the wind turbines, so the chicken sheds, and there's a separate large shed here as well. You'll note the sitting of the site, and I wouldn't say it's entirely surrounded, but it certainly sits within a agricultural industrial landscape. This map is a distribution of interested feedstock counterparties. I would stress that this is indicative. However, it's work done by the applicant to demonstrate to us where they believe they'll be sourcing the majority of their feedstock. You'll note that the majority is to the south of the M1, which runs down here. It is a local enterprise, and part of it is the symbiotic relationship with the chicken sheds, which are on site, where a lot of the poultry manure is going to be taken straight from the sheds and put into the anaerobic digester. And I'd say leave you with a layout plan for examination. So with regards to the principle, we've set out there's a number of benefits to the site. Policy S1 of the West Northamptonshire Joint Core Strategy does limit new development in rural areas, but it does support proposals which strengthen rural enterprise. We also have policy S2, which states proposals which sustain and enhance the rural economy by creating and safeguarding jobs and businesses will be supported where they're an appropriate scale for their location, respect the environmental quality and character of the rural area, and protect the best and most versatile agricultural land. The policy also identifies 7 types of development which are considered to be acceptable. The proposal doesn't sit neatly within any of the criteria. However, criterion B and G are applicable. That being schemes for farm diversification involving small-scale business and commercial development that contribute to the operational and viability of the farm holding. And further is F, which is small-scale employment development to meet local needs. And discussion with policy, our policy colleagues, there is no definition of appropriate scale or small scale. So we have to consider the context of this policy. That being the site around it, the noted planning history, and the potential symbiotic relationship with the surrounding farms. Therefore, in isolation, such a scheme may be inappropriate, but within the setting of its current surrounds, the development is felt to be of an appropriate scale. With respect to criterion B, the submission further goes on that the feedstock would be provided by the landowner's farm. However, we also know that this may not be entirely necessary for the viability of the farm, but within the submission, you'll note the further benefits to other farmers having the ability to provide feedstock to this location, especially the rural sort of economy and also the local impact this will have in terms of local generation for farmers. We also have policy 10, which sets out the sustainable development principles for development, including maximize the generation of its energy needs from decentralized or renewable low carbon sources. This is green technology, as we've set forward, and we have the further enhancement of the carbon dioxide being taken off and then feeding back into the Northampton local economy. As such, we think that the principle of development can be supported. We've also run through the amenity impact, odour and noise. Now, it's important to note that there is also the Environment Agency, which will require permitting of the site. Planning sits with the permitting scheme, but it's difficult because planning shouldn't cross over into items that the permitting scheme will also deal with. You will note that the environmental health has provided some suitably worded conditions on this, but the applicant will still have to submit an environmental permit to the Environment Agency, which has significant teeth and is a significantly arduous process for the applicant to go through. So on the first instance of what we've been submitted with, we believe that the suitably worded conditions will mean that we don't have an odour or noise issue, but there will be the environment permitting for the applicant to go through after this. In terms of heritage and archaeology, there is the Courtine Hall that you note from my site photos. I could see no views into it, and our heritage colleagues have said that they do not believe there'll be an impact. We have no objection from highways. I am aware, and you will have noted, the Quintine Parish Council comments, and I've provided an update to that. We've given some consideration to this, and I believe Sean will cover off some of it further for you, but it's important to remember that any condition or section 106 not only has to be enforceable, it has to be legal and dealing with the impacts of the site. The applicants provided a detailed assessment of vehicle movements coming on and off the site. This sees the proposed development for the majority of the year generating 32 to 35 HGV tractor trips per day, total of 64 to 70 tractor movements in total. In September and October, and June and July, which is the main Rye and May silage, these traffic levels would peak for around 2 weeks, obviously weather dependent, to 87 HGV tractor trips per day, which is about 174 total movements. If we look at the feedstock map, you will note that the majority of these movements will be, again, to the south of the M1. So as you leave the site, turning left. It should also be noted that many of these movements would have been replicated by the farmers anyway, as their produce would have still been harvested and taken off site. So we are seeing a replication of some traffic movements going around the site, and on the public highway. There will be new highway movements, but there will also be a replication. The scheme is also environmental, an EIA scheme, so environmental impact assessment. Its officers' views that a high quality ES has been submitted. We've reviewed it in detail, and we've run through the EIA concerns. EIA mainly focuses on the cumulative impact, so that's sitting around it. So in this case, it would be the polytunnels and the extant consent of the polytunnels and the approved chicken shed. And it's considering how these impacts, when they're combined, will have an impact on the wider environment. In this case, its officers' views that the impact is not so severe that an application could not be approved. So in terms of the planning balance, the scheme is providing renewable energy, and this is going to help the local authority to achieve its net zero carbon, which in this council is 2045. It is a well-established farming operation, and though officers would accept that the building is of not particular merits, it is an anaerobic digester. The applicant has offered a suitable landscaping plan, which by year 15 should show marginal impact on any wider views coming into the site. But from the beginning of construction, it is felt that the site is well located within an agri-industrial landscape, making good use of the topography, good use of the M1, and good use of the surrounding buildings, such as the chicken sheds and the polytunnels. As such, The secluded rural location will not adversely impact the surrounding area, with the proposed site location not being visible from the neighbouring properties apart from those of the agricultural tied dwellings. And any noise and odour issue we believe has been suitably mitigated and can be covered by condition and by the EIA permitting. As such, its officers' views that the application should be recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions on the presentation? Please. Councillor Herring.
Loads, but you managed to answer some of them. Thank you. And I was really pleased, and I presume it is going to be a condition, because I would have asked for it, for this site to be restored at any time when it's not required, if the science changes or it goes bust or whatever, that it's not automatically now considered to be an industrial site in open countryside. I understand they can then come in and apply for something, but the understanding is that 30 years that it's restored back to agriculture, should that be the case. So I was really pleased that, and you say that's going to be now put in as a condition. Yeah.
Yes, Councillor.
Thank you. And a few things that I wanted to ask was, have the fire brigade been consulted in this? Because we are talking about quite large quantities of gas, and I presume that's flammable. And I would have thought they might be a useful consultee to just check access and safety considerations around this. I mean, luckily there's only chickens, not so many houses surrounding it, but even so, I would have thought they would be a useful consultee to check that the siting and access that they would require should something happen would be very useful.
I couldn't tell off the top of my head if we consulted the fire brigade.
It's not listed in your list of consultations.
No.
I just looked.
I would, and it's easy to keep saying this, but it would defer quite often back to the EA permitting. So this is the EA would consider any potential impacts, including safety, within their permitting scheme. So it wouldn't be not looked at, and the EA certainly wouldn't approve any scheme which wasn't safe for members of the public.
Okay, I've just it's useful to think about that, because I don't know what criteria go in their permitting scheme, but it may be something that isn't specific in their permitting scheme. So it would be quite useful to know that that has been considered, since this seems to be something that is a new, new development. One of the other things I wanted to ask was, there's quite a lot about wastewater, but not about, I gather it's very hungry for water, for fresh water input, as opposed to the wastewater. And especially when you pointed out the, I know it's not been developed yet, but the planning permission for the polytunnels and the growing there, which would also be hungry for water. I wouldn't like to think that the whole of Quinton suddenly turned the taps on and couldn't get any water, and have the applicants actually been in touch with the water company and assess that that there is adequate supply for everybody.
I would have to defer to that technical question, I think, to the applicants when they present. It'd be something I think they could probably answer in a bit more detail than I could.
Thank you. You mentioned SIL, but does this site pay rates?
Business rates.
Does it pay rates? Yeah.
I'm afraid I wouldn't know. I'm being nodded at, but again, I'd save that question for the applicant.
I mean, is it
legal?
To answer that point, obviously, whether or not they pay business rates or not is not a planning consideration. It's business activity.
Okay.
So it's a fair assumption they will pay a rateable activity for a business operation, as any business would.
Okay.
Okay.
And what was the route for these 87 tractor loads a day from the south? Because tractors can't go on the M1, can they?
No, it wouldn't just be tractors. No, it's south of the M1 is there we go. So I don't think there'd be many routes at all on the M1 because it wouldn't be particularly convenient.
So which villages what will the access routes be?
So one of the conditions is a primary routing plan, and that is for a demonstration of the primary routing of the vehicles. It won't stop vehicles going in different directions, but the point is we've asked for a primary routing plan to be submitted to the local authority, which will then be provided to all the contractors to show the primary routing of the roads that they need to take to and from. So this is obviously indicative, but it's mainly showing villages to the south of the site. Where we're sort of, let's say, villages, the fields to the south of the site where the feedstock will be taken from.
So were there any villages that are impacted by this? I can't see the map, so I've forgotten my Google Earth, unfortunately, today.
Can we just ask Sean, could you just come back on that, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just regards that point. Sorry, it revolves around the comments we received from Highways on page 19. They initially asked for a section 106 agreement to be agreed upon with the applicants for routing of those vehicles. They then go on to say, however, that a suitable condition has now been included that allows the same results. So if your members' attention to page 34, that's what Chris was mentioning, that's prior to the commencement of the development, an operational traffic management plan or an OTMP that was submitted to and agreed in writing. So that will include, as his bullet point suggests there, site access, site traffic management, HGV routing, vehicle scheduling, wheel washing and so forth. So that will cover the actual movements, tours and froings of vehicles and delivery vehicles to the actual site.
I think it's a shame that that information can't be presented to us, because obviously, you know, a lot of these villages have very poor access roads, and it may be impacting significantly on some of them, but I wouldn't know. So it's a shame we can't have that information. And I'm sure the local parish councils will be, you know, I wouldn't like to think that it's going to come as a big surprise and they say, oh, why didn't you talk to us, because, you know, we're severely impacted and they've taken the corner off the pub or whatever because of all these vehicles. If we don't have that information, we can't take it into consideration, can we?
Just to come back on that point, if that had been an issue, the higher officers would have objected to on that basis and asked for that information. And if I can draw your attention
I'm
back
so
to page
pleased
19,
you've got as much faith in the highways department.
no, had it been an issue, they would have objected to it. But on page 19, they haven't. And on page 34, that reflects the condition that highways have put forward or we've agreed upon with the applicants and through the case officer to cover off that point. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Stone.
Thank you. I was going to ask about a risk assessment and health and safety issues as well, because I think, like Councillor Humphreys, Herring, I'm really worried about that volume of flammable material on one site. So there must be mitigations for that, surely, built into the site. And although I understand the majority of movements are going to be local, what's the furthest site where material is going to be collected from or driven from?
Sean.
If I can come back on those points, I mean, as the case officer did mention, this is an indicative plan. This isn't set in stone,
No.
but these show there's some indicative sites. And going back to the point you mentioned about the risk assessment, the case officer mentioned that the site will be subject to an environmental permit being granted by the Environment Agency. Now, whilst I can't speak, and obviously you can speak on behalf of the Environment Agency, my experience from working on the county council, dealing with the minerals and waste side of it and large incinerators, not AD plants, but some AD plants, the environmental permits asked for fire risk assessments being there, fire plans to be in there, and what the emergency procedures are, and all that is assessed by officers at the Environment Agency, and only when they are satisfied will they grant that permit. Now, if they don't grant the permit, then further work's required to get it through that permitting regime. So even if an application were to be granted, if this application were to be granted today by members, it doesn't necessarily negate the need for them to secure that permit, which will control those elements. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so I'm still worried about the volume of traffic movements and the carbon footprint associated with that. So that's good. We've got an indicative map, but what is the thinking in terms of, you know, what's the market for this? Where this must be collecting material from quite a wide radius, surely. These are very hungry plants, aren't they?
They are, and I have looked at previous appeal decisions, so there is no way we can condition this feedstock map. I think part of your question would be well directed at the applicants. In part, we have to trust the fact that it's not viable to import materials from vast distances. It's looking for local supply because it helps with a symbiotic relationship in working within itself. And that's also, I think, part of the rationale with the applicant wants to be next to the chicken sheds because they're then getting poultry feed immediately from the chicken sheds. I understand where your concerns come from, but I'd say I would suggest that question is re-asked to the applicant as well. But it is one of the highways movements you've always got to remember dissipate relatively quickly. So it's not that every single HGV or tractor is going to go through one village. If they turn left and 90%, 95% turn left on the first road, they will then follow the main routing plan, but then they will sort of start dissipating off into the smaller rural roads, etc. So you don't have a very hard concentration going through one very remote village. It's that dissipation of the traffic movements.
Right. And then could you just, because I don't understand it, could you just explain all the business around the CO2 and what impact that is going to have on the environment and how that's going to be transported safely?
So the CO2 is going to be transported via lorry. So usually AD plants vent the CO2. The point here is that they want to retain the CO2. They'll then move it into vehicles, and CO2 is you may remember back in COVID, there was a national shortage, I think, of CO2. The business plan is to sell the CO2 into the Northampton industrial estate rather than it going into the atmosphere.
Right. Thank you.
Councillor Pritchard.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of questions that probably you possibly could answer, but at the same time, I'm sure the applicant would. When you look at and sort of coming from this particular area, and when you look at that green patch there, majority of that is in my ward, so I understand from a traffic perspective. But also, one of the things I'm concerned about is the aromas that come from these particular plants. Will the storage of chicken muck and cow droppings and so on, will that be stored prior to going into the digesters? Because obviously that is where, in fact, aromas are actually, should we say, generated from. And also, you notice that you've noticed that there is production of gas. Does the gas go straight into the gas network like other anaerobic digesters? And also the drainage ponds, how do you actually ensure that the drainage ponds don't get contaminated from some of the wash that comes out of these particular plants? I think that's all I've got at the moment. So if you can answer any of those, fine. If not, perhaps we'll leave it to the applicant.
I think I'll go for a brief overview, Councillor, and then defer to the technical expertise of the applicant on the rest of it. So the gas is transported into the network via lorry, and they'll then be taken in to sort of some kind of input device, I think in Northampton, but that's how it enters the gas network. That's the gas produced on site. In terms of odour, obviously we have a condition we've put forward. On the site visit, you would have noted, well, sorry, you weren't there, but the smell of the chicken farm is non-existent. Its technology has moved on, I think, considerably. And the horrors of sort of the early 90s, etc., of these AD plants isn't in existence anymore. The EA permitting, and I'm sorry to keep bouncing to the EA, but the EA permitting will also deal with the odour and the odour impact. So they will be covering that, and our environmental health have assessed the odour issue and have suggested a suitably worded condition that they think will help with that. But on terms of the technical reduction of odour, I would ask the applicant how they would deal with that.
And the very last question is with regards to, we sat on an application probably, I don't know, 6 months, 9 months, a year ago for a similar sort of plant at Ashton, which in fact is adjacent to this particular plant. Was any consideration given with regards to the traffic that would be generated from this one and also obviously the Ashton plant?
The environmental statement considers the cumulative impact of traffic, and that would have been what our highways colleagues would have looked at. So they would have assessed the cumulative impact on the traffic network. So that would have come into their consideration, the overall impact of traffic.
Councillor Humphreys.
Thank you. I think you may have answered my first question, which was make reference to the central facility for injecting the biomethane into the national grid. Was that in Northampton, do you think?
I believe it's Northampton. I think.
Okay, so it's not.
I think the
it's
applicant
nearby.
will clarify where that injection
Okay,
is.
thank you. And the total number of traffic movements, I think you said in the report, were 11,322 per annum. But you say part of those are a replication of what's already on the roads locally, but it's really an intensification. But do you have an approximate figure for current HGV tractor movements?
I would do if I went delving, I think, into the report. I'm afraid I don't know that off the top of my head.
I think we just remember that highways have put no objections in. Can we just make that clear now? Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Manners.
Chair, I note your point about the highways, we have no objection, but I certainly don't have confidence in highways based on some of our previous applications. So I look for that to be restored. I mean, the Quinton Parish Council went into great detail on the highways impacts, and I'm pleased that some way that has been mitigated. I do think there's a wider issue, and it's not just about this. This is about the industrialization of this part of the farm and the farmland around the M1. I'm all for this particular development, and I could understand the polytunnels, understand the chicken sheds, etc. But it's how far does this go? It's just a wider point, really, because it is going to be quite an industrial complex, which was 10 years ago just green fields, and that's just a general point. I know it's not as pertinent to this application, but it's just how far do we allow landowners to go to create these centres for all the right reasons.
In a brief look at that, I'd say obviously each application is looked at on its individual merits. If we look at the surrounding applications, it is considered this application sits well within, it may have been intentional that the polytunnels went further out and then they came back in, but you would look at each application's own individual merits, and you take into consideration everything that sits around it. In this particular instance, the way the topography sits and the way it sits within the existing and extant applications, it's felt that this application is acceptable. It may well be that if another field was brought forward, that may be deemed to have a different landscape impact. It may be deemed that cumulatively that is too far. It might be that another scheme highways object to because of the cumulative impact on the highways network, that being when all the other developments take into consideration, that is too far. But as you say, unfortunately, it's each on its own individual merit, is their standard planner phrase.
Councillor Stone.
Could I just come back to that question about the industrialisation of the rural areas? Is there anything in our local plan, or should there be something in our local plan with regard to, you know, a consideration of proportionality? Because one of the fears is that we're going to be losing arable land that we will need for growing food. And so I just wonder where that, you know, if that's not a consideration for us here, where in the council is that going to be a consideration? And should that be something that we ask to be included in the refreshed local plan? Because it seems to me if we don't have that, then we're leaving ourselves open to the exploitation of rural land without any protection. So I am worried about that. But the other question I wanted to ask, this is a considerable development. Do we know how many jobs it's going to generate?
5 full-time equivalent jobs, and I believe it's 100 jobs during construction. It's 5 full-time equivalent jobs during operation and 100 full-time equivalent jobs during construction. That is page 27.
Sorry, through you, Chair, if I could just come back to Councillor Stone's first point. The consideration of usage or erosion, as mentioned there, of agricultural land. I mean, that is a topic that could very easily, or should, the only avenue open at this moment in time is for the new local plan to look at that. There is a classification nationally of our agricultural land in terms of its classification and its productivity and so forth. And I'm sure Chris will correct me if I'm wrong, but from what as part of the presentation and my reading of the report, this is the lower grade of that agricultural land. It's not the higher grade agricultural land. I mean, there are some authorities that have an abundance of the lower grade. There are some authorities that do have an abundance of the higher grade, and it's just that mix throughout the country as a whole, rather than one particular area. But yes, to answer your point, that is something that needs to be looked at within the new local plan, or a policy that perhaps looks at that and looks at an assessment or other sites being available rather than employing for the first site available. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Chandler.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to comment that as one who is involved with the production of the refreshed local plan, I would say new local plan, this is a consideration that is part of that process. So it is being considered.
Councillor Stone.
One last question, if you don't mind. What is the legacy impact of this development after the 30 years on the land and on the local environment?
So the restoration condition would be to restore it back to its use as of today and its land quality. So complete removal of any contamination.
And that includes the water courses, does it?
Yeah, but it would include restoration.
Any other members' questions? No, thank you. We've only got one speaker, and that's the applicant agent. Alistair Veach, if it could come forward, please, sir. Sit over there. No, here, sir. You'll need to bring your microphone to you because it's not that sensitive. You've got 5 minutes, sir.
Okay. Dear Chair and councillors, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Alistair from the applicant Acorn Bioenergy. I'm joined here today by members of the Acorn team. Javier Jimenez, Director of our parent company, Qualitas Energy, Daniel Lambert, our Downstream and Innovation Director responsible for biomethane and carbon dioxide production, and Charlie Lywood, our Commercial Director. As you know, we're in a climate emergency, and this application will support West Northamptonshire's own net zero and renewable energy targets alongside delivering numerous economic and environmental benefits for the local area. Let me first explain what anaerobic digestion is. It's a naturally occurring process that's very similar to the digestive process of a cow, where microbes break down agricultural waste materials and break crops to create energy in an airtight tank. This makes biogas, which is then upgraded to biomethane and green carbon dioxide. The end product is an organic fertilizer called digestate, which is much better for soils and the environment than synthetic fertilizers. The feedstocks Acorn will use for the process are silages, such as grass, maize, and rye, and manure, straw, and poultry litter from nearby farms, materials which frequently go to waste. Other anaerobic digestion plants take food waste or sewage waste. This will not be the case. Anaerobic digestion is a well-established and reliable technology used around the world. The proposal has several environmental benefits. Firstly, the production of biomethane at the plant will be enough to heat over 7,000 UK homes or fuel 270 heavy goods vehicles continuously for a year with green energy. Biomethane fuels are currently powering bus fleets in Nottingham and Bristol, while also being used to heat homes across the UK. The use of biomethane compared to fossil fuel gas and the capture of carbon dioxide through the anaerobic digestion process will save 31,230 tonnes of carbon dioxide annually. Plants like this one can make a vital contribution to tackling climate change, something that is affecting us all. In addition, producing biomethane here in West Northamptonshire will boost the UK's energy security and bring down customers' bills. We're currently in the midst of a cost of living crisis, with energy prices forecast to remain both volatile and high over the next decade. The need to secure our energy supply remains a major priority for UK national and economic security. The production of biomethane, a green gas, can help boost domestic supply and reduce demand for imported fossil fuel gas, the supply of which is unpredictable, highlighted by the ongoing war in Ukraine. The plant will also make a positive contribution to the local economy. Once operational, there'll be up to 15 skilled jobs, 5 on the plant and 10 elsewhere. 100 jobs created during the construction period. Acorn will employ local firms for a wide range of goods and services. Acorn will boosting the local economy by the purchase of feedstocks from local farms, ensuring revenue is spent in the local area. We will supply local industry in West Northamptonshire with carbon dioxide produced by the facility, providing a cleaner and cheaper alternative to imported fossil fuel carbon dioxide. There are several benefits through the production of nutrient-rich organic digestate fertilizer too. Digestate can replace costly and carbon-intensive synthetic fertilizers used today, which have skyrocketed since the Ukraine war, thus helping to bring down farmers' costs and helping them to bring down food prices. Digestate improves soil health, boosting crop yields and food production. The use of digestate means soil can hold more carbon, enhancing biodiversity and increasing water retention capacity, allowing crops to flourish in drought conditions. Digestate fertilizer also results in greater nutrient retention, helping to reduce river pollution through less agricultural runoff. We carried out a comprehensive public consultation, holding a public exhibition in Road last year, and we met with Courtine Hall and Road parish councils earlier this year. We are pleased to say that we've received no objections from the public. With the potential to accelerate UK decarbonisation, reduce our dependency upon foreign energy imports, boost UK food production, and improve the local economy environment, I hope the committee will join officers in supporting the application. I'll be delighted to take questions on the application. And hopefully, Chair, with your permission, allow some of my team to answer some of the more pertinent questions. Thank you.
I'm sure you will know all the technical answers. Right. Could you just move your microphone just to one side? So, because it's not that sensitive. So when you're doing it, that'd be absolutely fine. Members, any questions? Councillor Pritchard.
Thank you, Chair. As per my previous question, with regards to the amount of slurry and also, of course, chicken muck that does it come straight to this location and straight into the digesters, or will it be stored prior to going into the digesters?
We will have some storage on site, but it will be in a shed and it will be odor controlled. So odor is a primary concern, and obviously we wish to mitigate it wherever possible.
So it will meet all the EU standards regards covering and so on and so forth.
Yes, it will.
The other thing, also with regards to the drainage ponds, how do you actually eliminate any runoff that will contaminate these drainage ponds?
Yeah, sure. Well, we have basically a dirty water containment zone. So anything that goes within a dirty area, that was contained and then sent straight to the digesters. The lagoon, the clean water lagoon onto the south side of the site effectively just takes runoff from clean areas. So there's strictly controlled area designation within the drainage on site.
And the last question, with regards to the gas itself, other digesters actually can pump the gas straight into the national network. You know, with yours, you're actually going to have to transport it somewhere else.
Yeah, that's right.
Why is that?
Just that the national grid, the national gas network in the area can't facilitate the amount of gas that we would be producing.
And last question is, did you actually publicise the amount of traffic, particularly when you look at some of the other parishes that are adjacent to this one?
So when we had the exhibition, we fully talked through all the transport movements that we would do, as we did with Road Parish Council and with Courtine.
Okay, thank you.
Any of them? Sorry. Councillor Manners.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions. One is, what is the investment in the site out of interest? And secondly, is this the optimum size? And are you building bigger plants in other locations?
Sorry, on the first one, I'm not sure that's planning. When you want to know the amount of money they're investing on the site. Well, it probably can, but it's not a planning consideration.
It's general knowledge about a new area of technology that impacts climate change.
And again, it's not a planning consideration. Through you, Chair.
Okay, fine. Sorry, the first question was, what was the second part of the question again?
I'm interested in the optimum size.
Oh,
of
the optimum
plant.
size. So we believe this is the optimum size for what we're trying to do. The capture of carbon dioxide is quite an expensive process. And we needed to be this size so that we could justify the carbon dioxide capture equipment to run that piece of technology. So that's why we in Acorn are passionate really about the environment. And one of the things we're trying to do is to capture, it's such a waste to produce all this carbon dioxide and not capture it. And so that's the reason the facility is the size it is, so that we can have the ability to capture all that carbon dioxide, that 10,000 tonnes.
Councillor Stone.
Thank you. So exactly what is going to be transported and over what distances?
So if I may just correct what was earlier said, actually our injection hub is in Banbury rather than Northamptonshire. So we will be taking the biomethane and injecting it into Banbury. We do have other hubs as well available. So we've got a hub in Newton Longville where we can transport it to, or there are other hubs available in the UK as well. We have rights to Portsdown Hill in Portsmouth as well.
What's the risk?
The gas is moved across the UK by a tanker all the time. It's a well-established technology, and we'll be obviously following all the rules and regulations associated with it.
Councillor Herring.
You've just raised a really big red flag for me that you're going to be taking gas tankers through to Banbury, which will presumably be down the Farthinghoe Road, where we know we've got a pinch point where lorries are actually crashing into one another because the road is too narrow and the government won't pay for the bypass. Lovely.
Well, we have Banbury and we also have Newton Longville, so we can take it down the M1 to Newton Longville as well.
Can or will?
Sorry, sorry, councillor Herring, what's the question, please?
Well, when we were talking about traffic movements, I was just looking at the from the field to the site, but they're going to be taking gas tankers through from the M1 to Banbury, and I know whereabouts this site is, where they're going to pump the gas through to, and we have a specific problem at Farthinghoe, where is the route that they will have to take from the M1 through to Banbury, which has a pinch point that is so narrow that buses and lorries are actually hitting one another. And it's an issue because it's in my ward, and we've been there was some money set aside. There is a bypass consultation, there's a bypass route being agreed, but the government won't give us the money to actually widen the road, and it's truly dangerous.
So in my experience of this, it'll be gas tankers, which will be built to a standard, yeah, like petrol tankers are and things like that. And if you want to add anything.
Just for you, Chair, I just feel we're perhaps just deviating from the point here is the fact that it will be moved on, it is capturing gas and so forth that would normally be vented straight into the actual atmosphere. There is a massive green benefit from this proposal. And I think the applicant has already said that there are other options available. Now, if one node isn't available, others will be used. But again, that isn't part of something that we could readily condition or monitor, part of any planning agreement or planning condition. Chair, thank you.
Members, any other questions of the applicant? No.
Thank you.
We'll now go to open debate. Any members want to say anything in open debate? Councillor Stone.
I support this kind of technology and the greening of what we do. So, you know, I welcome this application, but I don't think it's straightforward. I do think there are complex issues surrounding it that the local authority, particularly in regard to the local plan, needs to take on board. And I think we've highlighted some of those things today. So, you know, having some kind of sense of proportion in the overall use of arable land for new technologies is one. Trying to work a little bit smarter with highways so that we get better information, but also better resolutions to how we manage vehicle movements and what the mitigations are for that. I'm quite appreciative of the fact that within this application, you know, there are design features and landscaping features that kind of mitigate against some of the industrialization. So I'm appreciative of that. So overall, I support it because of the green agenda. And I think this is the kind of technology that we need to be supporting. But I think as a local authority, we need to have regard and ask the appropriate services to do a bit more work in supporting how these things happen safely without undermining rural life and undermining village life. And I am rather concerned about the pinch point Councillor Herring is talking about, and those things need to be addressed. But overall, I'm in favour of this application.
Sorry, Councillor Clark.
Thank you very much. Whilst I'm one of the ward members for Hackerton and Grange Park on this occasion, I'm speaking as a member of the committee because I'm a named substitute for this committee. The views that I've heard so far are very interesting. Now, I was one of the members who attended the site visit that took place last week, and I was rather interested in the paragraph that was subsequently amended in the committee updates that were published today. I refer to paragraph 39. And the highways, local highway authority advised that, and I quote, the applicant should, the local highways authority advised that the applicant should liaise with the local police to set up a moving traffic offences system to prevent HGVs using the weight restricted route towards Quinton. And so in that light, I'm rather pleased, although perhaps in some ways disappointed, to see the correction that's been made, which somehow fundamentally seemed to affect what the proposal was. However, given what I've heard so far, it seems to me that we have some options that we need to consider. We could defer a decision on this until, for example, we had further information that may be required. And I'm thinking about the actuality of the operational traffic management plan, or we could amend the recommendation, or we can accept the recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Manners?
Thank you, Chair. I completely support what Councillor Stone said, and also the words on Councillor Clark. The traffic management plan, I'm not really privy. All I'm interested in is protecting Quinton as a village and the traffic movements through there. And I just don't think the initial report went into enough detail. And this comes back to the skepticism I have on the highways response. Although they did suggest a 106, which then has been rescinded because of the enforcement. I don't think we need more information. I just think we want absolute certainty and assurance that the traffic management plan will be as robust as possible for the residents in those villages. That's what I would be looking for, and I'm fully supportive of the principle of the development.
Councillor Pritchard.
Thank you, Chair. Like my colleagues, I'm very supportive indeed. Obviously, actually living in this particular area where, in fact, some of the traffic that actually is going to be generated. But once again, I feel that from our, shall we say, traffic management perspective, is that I do question some of the objections or non-objections that have perhaps not come from our department. One of the things actually is when you look at things like, the Northampton Gateway, and you look at all of these other projects that are going on, and also when you look at the very similar sort of situation over at Ashton, I do question sometimes whether, in fact, the whole of this entity actually is being considered by our highways department. I'm very, very supportive of this particular type of thing, and it will certainly get my vote.
Councillor Humphreys.
Thank you. Yes, I'm entirely supportive of this proposal. The contribution it will make to reducing CO2 is significant, and it will support our WNC's targets for achieving net zero by 2045, which we shouldn't forget. There are obviously traffic concerns, but I don't think we should defer on that basis.
Councillor Chandler.
Thank you, Chair. I'm encouraged that most of my colleagues seem to be supportive of this application. So therefore, I would like to propose that we accept officer's advice and grant the permission subject to the conditions as modified and presented to us today.
It's a proposal by Councillor Chandler. Will you seconder for that? Right, can we just...
I wanted to say something
Sorry, you can say
in
something.
advance. Yeah.
No, you can say something after if anyone's going to second that motion. Councillor Pritchard, you'll second the motion. Councillor Herring.
I just want to say that I feel that I must abstain from voting on this because I don't feel I'm supportive of the proposal, but I don't think enough information has been presented to us about the traffic routes, and I am concerned about safety in the villages and particularly now the pinch point, and just don't believe that the information has been presented to us to reassure me that we're safe to go ahead with this. So I will abstain.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Manners.
Chair, thank you. I've got quite a lot of sympathy with Councillor Herring, but I would just like to hear Sean and Chris's views on the traffic enforcement and the teeth within the traffic management plan that they're talking about.
Thank you, councillor. So the fundamental issue is going to be what vehicle movements are generated from this proposal versus what is being generated elsewhere. Now, that is one of the reasons why the section 106 doesn't work, because you'll suddenly be providing a TRO for farmers that have used this route for 40, 50 years. That's not an impact of this development. So the point of the traffic management plan is to provide a primary routing. So the applicant will have to set out the primary routing that vehicles will take, and that will then go to highways for their approval. Once that primary routing has been established and approved by the local authority, the condition then sets out that all contractors and everyone using the anaerobic digester must be provided with this primary routing. The primary, so any contract they secure with a farmer, etc., this will be included within that information. This is the primary route that you must come into. There will, of course, be exceptions where they need to deviate from the primary route because that's where their destination is. But that sits with the primary routing. As far as that goes, I think as long as that's complied with in terms of the contractor being provided with that, we then don't have much more that we can establish or enforce.
So through you, Chair, and come back to Councillor, there's in terms of, I think you mentioned about potential enforceability. I mean, obviously, if there is a regular deviation from this, is something we can certainly investigate. And also there's, we can ask for the way in which this actual condition is worded. We could ask for proof of that evidence has been served on those HGV movements or companies that have been contracted to deliver the goods, or sorry, the feed to the actual site itself. So there is avenues in which to look at this. I mean, and I think this is one of the things that highways had as their concern, and Chris touched upon, that if you get a HGV movement down one of those lanes, it may be going to one of the farmers to pick up some grain. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to this particular site. We could go past the site. That's what makes it incredibly difficult, that type of route to be done. But because of this particular condition, this is something that we can monitor and can look at and look into, certainly, if we become aware of situations occurring. Thank you, Chair.
So the solicitor just wants to come back on that point.
Thank you, Chair. It was just the point that on this occasion, thank you. Can everybody hear me? It was just to say, to follow up on that, condition 14 is a prior to commencement of development condition as well. So development on site would not commence without this being agreed. So it is considered sufficiently integral to resolve the traffic management plan before they could even, they can do certain preparatory works. They couldn't do anything substantive if they were successful with their application until the traffic management plan had been agreed with the council. So it gives you an idea of kind of where we've elevated, where the council's kind of pitched that condition in the overall process of the build. So it gives us an additional control that it just has to be resolved satisfactorily before we can start works on site.
Councillor Herring.
Can I just ask about this, the primary route, and am I just being idiotic and I'm not understanding because I couldn't see as closely as I wish to? Aren't all these tractors and movements going to have to converge to a bridge point to be able to get over the M1 to get on the other side, with all the land being on one side and the digester being on the other side? So they're not going to be the normal routes that those farm vehicles would take, because they're presumably going to have to converge to a bridge point, aren't they? Or am I not understanding it properly? Because they can't go on the M1. You're shaking your head, so please illuminate me.
I'd love to, but I suspect the officer might want to explain that to you. Would you want to do that?
Sorry, Councillor, I was just peeking through. Could you just repeat the question? Sorry, I missed the first part of it as I was looking for an answer on.
Right, sorry. my concern about this primary travel route, and you're saying, yeah, but the vehicles have to move anyway, so because they'd be going, doing about their normal farming. But on that map that you showed, the land that they're expecting to get the silage from is south of the M1 and the digester is north of the M1. And therefore, isn't the traffic going to have to go? No, okay, he's shaking his head. So just explain to me in simple language. Thank you.
So it is probably almost as close to the M1 as you could be, but it is south of the M1. So there is a lane that runs parallel to the M1. You turn right and you go under a bridge into Quinton. You turn left, and that would be the primary route out of the site.
So it's not having to cross the M1?
No.
Thank you. That helps. Thank you.
Thank you. Nobody else? Right, thank you. So we've had a proposal to accept officer's advice by councillor Chandler and seconded by councillor Pritchard. Those in favour? Eight. Those against? And one abstention. Thank you. Therefore, it has been agreed. Thank you. There's no urgent business that I've been notified of. Therefore, we will now close the meeting approximately 10 minutes past 3. Thank you, everybody.